Hello and welcome to Haunted Railways. Within the paranormal world, there are many things that are typically focused on when dealing with topics of ghosts and hauntings. These things are normally creepy houses, spooky graveyards, and sometimes even forests are seen as a home for spirits to reside. This is all fine and good and very interesting in themselves, but today I wanted to look at something a bit more out of the norm. While haunted railroads aren't anything new, it is a topic that is ever increasingly rare to be talked about. In fact, one location, which I didn't mention in this video, is quite near a famed haunted house, but to date, very few investigators have visited the railway in more favor of researching the mansion. So today, we are grabbing a lantern, getting our tickets punched, and taking a ride in the rails in order to discover some of the hauntings that take place there. Be sure to stay to the end, as I think the last one will leave you confounded. Before starting, I should mention that some of these stories could fall under the category of urban legend. However, with anything within this realm, there are proponents for both sides, so anything is possible. This especially, and should I say specifically, rings true for our first entry. Ghost of Fire. Harper's Ferry is located in West Virginia, and it is a town that is full of historical significance and quite a few hauntings. Let us not forget that West Virginia is also an area that has quite a few cryptids as well. In 1839, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, also known as simply B&O, completed construction of a rail line that crossed over the Potomac River, and part of the track ran through the Armory Courtyard. Previously, when the courtyard was being built, storage sheds were set up near the Potomac River, and shortly after B&O finished their 830 feet crossing, they were abandoned. It wasn't long after this that some of the poorer residents of the area came across these sheds and decided to make them their homes. However, they didn't offer too much protection from the elements, as they were incredibly hot during the summer and freezing cold in the wintertime. One such resident who had fallen on bad times, and according to all stories had no known family members, was a woman simply known as Jenny. Most of her days were spent trying to survive and finding things to eat. One winter, she was huddled around her makeshift fire cooking up some soup that she managed to acquire, while at the same time trying to keep herself warm from the elements. It was during this activity where an errant hot ash landed on her tattered skirt, quickly catching it on fire. In terror, she began to run towards the nearby train tracks in an attempt to make it to the train station, in the hopes that someone could help her. All the while, the flames continued to grow larger and larger, engulfing her body. Jenny made it quite a ways until she couldn't take the pain much longer. Sadly, it was at that moment that she was struck by a passing train, as she couldn't hear the brakes or the whistle over her own screams. The conductors knew it was something on the tracks, but couldn't tell it was a person due to the unusual sight of flames. Afterwards, her body was recovered and buried in an unmarked grave at the churchyard. A month after this tragedy, a train was traveling through the same area on a foggy night, and to the engineer's shock, he saw a strange ball of fire on the tracks before him, and could hear an ear-piercing scream coming from that area. He put on the brakes, but was unable to stop in time before running over the strange object. Stepping out in horror of what he might find, he checked all around but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Being not sure what happened, he continued on to the station, where he reported the incident to the station master. It was at that point that he realized what the engineer had seen was the ghost of Jenny, still looking for help. According to legend, she reappears on the anniversary of her death, still trying to find help. Also, it is said that train engineers still slow down when coming to that area in case she makes an appearance. Now, I am unsure how this story holds up, since the bridge was destroyed many times through history and finally by a flood in 1939. Also, the story holds many of the vague, telltale signs of being simply a legend, but I decided to begin our video with it to set the mood. Big Bull. Now we are moving on to a location in the southwestern part of Virginia known as Big Bull Tunnel. While the name doesn't sound particularly ominous, the whole area took a dark turn almost the very moment work began on the railroad tunnel. Sometimes it seems greater forces may have not wanted this place built. Records are a bit hard to come by, but most agree that the tunnel was built around 1870 or 1880. Once finished, the tunnel was 1,700 feet long, but even as such, the project took much longer than expected to be completed, mainly due to the land seeming to be cursed. As usual, when it comes to any building project, trained engineers and surveyors figured that the location would be a good place to build since the ground was mostly made of solid rock, which makes sense being this tunnel was being built into the mountains. However, once construction started, the crew faced rock slides and flooding on a daily basis. At one point the railroad was being laid out, and when they returned, they found the whole tunnel had been covered in fallen rock. Throughout the project, every bit of progress the workers made was undone quickly by rocks. It is worth noting again that the area was found to be stable, and shouldn't have had a rock problem. During construction, many men lost their lives mainly due to falling rocks, and 3 died when accidentally being caught in an explosion being used to clear the tunnel. Finally finished, Big Bull had its fair share of train traffic, but even as such, falling rock was a constant hazard. In 1896, a Clinch Valley flagman by the name of Floyd Francisco was traveling on his train when it suddenly hit a rock in the tracks, which threw him from the vehicle. He suffered minor injuries, but oddly enough, nothing had happened to the train, and it was perfectly fine to keep on its journey. Others weren't as lucky, since at least 4 other operators had a similar experience, but suffered fatal injuries when they were thrown from the train. On top of this, there were 2 fatal collisions in the tunnel, and in 1892, a night watchman named E.H. Pierce was found the next morning after his shift, laying in the tunnel where he had been shot, stabbed, and robbed during the night. So needless to say, Big Bull had seen and possibly caused quite a few deaths in a short period of time. Everyone thought the tunnel was cursed before, but soon murmurs of it being haunted started to spring up. With this, a man named Captain Judd Hall, who had worked on strengthening the tunnel in 1903 with archways, was adamant that the area was in fact haunted. Many of the men working with him told stories of hearing strange, eerie sounds coming from the tunnel. On July 17, 1905, an inspection was being done on the tunnel where 3 men, flagman John Perry, Captain Calloway, and an engineer known as Kearns, were given a task. Calloway and Kearns started inspecting the outside, while Perry stayed inside. Suddenly John came running out of the tunnel, claiming they heard strange noises. All 3 went to the spot where the sounds were reported. It didn't take long before they heard a ghostly moan coming from the walls. Calloway asked, "What do you want?" And the unseen phantom replied, "Remove that awful weight from my body." Speechless, the men stood in silence, and the voice spoke up again and said, "They are drinking my blood." The 3 men regrouped outside. Calloway got the courage up to return to the site, thinking that someone was pranking them, or in a worst case scenario, someone was actually trapped, since he knew behind that wall was nothing but rock. After an examination, nothing was found to conclude what was making the noise. Interestingly, the Norfolk and Western Railway started an investigation to figure out what was causing the noise, and to this day, the results of its study have not been made available to the public. Before moving on, I wonder why they wouldn't release what they found. During that time, if they found it to be someone playing a prank, they would have plastered that everywhere. But if it was found to be haunted, they may not want to mention it due to wanting people to continue to use the rail line. The other thing I wonder is, what was the spirit voice meaning when it said they were drinking his blood? Who or what was? Creepy to think about. The Bloody Pit. The Hoosac Tunnel, which means Place of Stone in Algonquin, is located in western Massachusetts, and at the time of its completion on February 9, 1875, was considered the second longest tunnel in the world, being 8.5 miles long. As time went on, it lost this title, but in 1989, it still was considered the 6th longest. Construction began in 1851 with a budget of $2 million, but by the end of the project, it wound up costing an impressive $21 million. So it is said, those amounts aren't reported as being converted to what it would cost today. If you're curious about that, I calculated it in today's money and it would be around $832 million. While being constructed, the tunnel was given the nickname the Bloody Pit due to how many deaths occurred on site. Reports vary, but the numbers can go as high as 193 men lost their lives to explosions and drowning. One of those 193 died in an extremely strange way that we will be talking about shortly. Due to these deaths, stories of ghosts started popping up. It got to a point where workers would refuse to work after dusk due to them all saying they heard a man's disembodied voice groaning in pain inside the tunnel. Many assumed that the voices they heard were workers who had died before. The workers not only heard voices, but saw shadow figures, ghost lights, and in some cases even felt something tugging on them. Apparently the men certainly should have been afraid, since one story mentions that the ghosts were capable of causing harm. On March 20th, 1865, 3 men named Ringo Kelly, Ned Brinkman, and Billy Nash were preparing an explosive charge of nitroglycerin to blast away rock. Once set, the 3 men made their way to the end of the tunnel, but Ringo made it there first and for some reason set off the charges before Ned and Billy made it to safety. Ringo went into hiding after this event, but a shocking discovery was made a year later. Workers found the body of Ringo at the mouth of the tunnel, and all signs pointed to him being strangled to death. This led many to believe that Ned and Billy may have returned from the grave and exacted their revenge on him. To this day, the tunnel remains active, both with trains and spirits. As mentioned, people still report hearing disembodied screams, almost all that venture to the tunnel report feeling something tugging on them, and others have seen workers appear and vanish in the blink of an eye. One story even mentioned someone seeing a headless miner, where it started off as a blue light and then formed into a human being. It is seen floating above the tracks, accompanied with a painful moan, before heading back deeper into the tunnel. Moscow subway. With our final entry, I want to show you a video clip that started my whole search into haunted railroads. I recently saw this video on the TV show Strange Evidence on the Science Channel. This series basically works like the show What on Earth, where they look at images or footage and give their best answers as to what it could be. Unlike Ancient Aliens, they seem to look at all possible explanations. The video comes from a security camera located in the metro station of Polizivskaya, Moscow. Anyway, here is the clip. Okay, I know what you may be thinking. Probably the same thing I did, as well as every comment I saw involving this clip online. That it was a ghosting effect from poorly erased videotape. Within the show, they said it couldn't be ghosting, since the footage was digital and didn't use tapes. The other comment was that it was Photoshop, but that was debunked by the experts as well. I find it interesting that none of the people seen in the film noticed this object. I will say what could hurt this is that the video has been shown on the internet claiming to be from other areas including Japan, but the footage is the same. I frequently see people do this with paranormal evidence. I guess for some reason it is thought that putting something in Japan makes it spookier? I don't know. I do know that reports of this phantom sighting have been mentioned a few times in the same area. It is also worth noting that people have seen ghost cars, airplanes, boats, and even houses before, so why not a subway car? Now, I'm not saying this is definitive proof of a ghost vehicle, but I have no clue what it is and thought you might find it as interesting as I did. As I end this, I did want to mention that I wanted to include areas from locations around the world, but ran into trouble. England is said to have some of the most haunted railways around, but I couldn't find enough information behind it, outside of short blurbs, in order to include it here. Not to be outdone, India also has quite a few railway stations that are said to be haunted, but again, it fell victim to misinformation and little information. On a side note, I chose not to include the haunted railroad in Texas, in which it is said the ghosts of school children are supposed to push parked vehicles across the tracks, but I omitted it since it was proven to be an optical illusion. Oh yeah, and I actually remembered to do something I said I was going to do from last week's video. Here are a few comments that I enjoyed. Last week's video had so many, and honestly it was really hard just to pick 3. But rest assured, just because I don't mention it here, I do love most all of your comments. So, Tracy Getz says, "You're such a cool guy. I've been watching your videos for years now. I don't know why I never commented. Just glad you're doing this and hope you'll continue. Hare Krishna." Thank you, Tracy, and thank you for watching my content for so long. I hope you continue to leave comments, and don't worry, I'll keep making videos as long as I'm physically able to. Sean Thornton says, "Glad to see you still doing it, Brohan. Always thoughtful content and always a good watch." Thank you, Sean. Brohan, huh? I try to keep things well researched and honest as possible on my channel, but sometimes I do get things wrong. I'm glad you enjoy my content. Also, don't worry about me quitting YouTube. I have zero plans of that, but if by some strange reason I would decide to stop, I'd be sure to make a video on it. But I'm not quitting. Restion Serpentine says, "Coming soon to Sci-Fi, Ghostfoot. A story of some dumb teenagers who do dumb things and are tormented by the restless spirit of a Bigfoot whose gravesite they desecrate." This comment must be in reference to my statement in the video that it was an odd combination of ghost and Bigfoot footage. Honestly, if any TV channel would make a show about Ghostfoot, it would be Sci-Fi. There already is a sci-fi movie called Ghost Shark with sort of the same premise. If you all suddenly see Ghostfoot on TV, it must mean someone at Sci-Fi watches my channel. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. And also, please share my videos with someone you know who may be interested in this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.